All right, man. What's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Man, pretty good. Super stoked. We're finally on video. We've
I
got
know.
awesome lighting going on all corners. We got this super banging like background thing. So I'm really excited about diving into episode 3 of Story World. And man, I'm pumped. So we're going to be talking about our personal stories uh, this time around, right? Like how I got into storytelling, how Alex got into storytelling. I think it's going to be really cool.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be the two minds clash today about where you come from in the nonfiction world and getting up kind of in the business side of things, and me, of course, and deep into fantasy and all the fictional side of everything. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see where we came together, and now we're discussing it all as one.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's kind of like we're still sort of in the beginning phases in this podcast, setting it up, and there's going to be a lot to talk about, but there's a lot of stories that happened that led to this moment, right? Of actually creating Story World. And so, yeah, I figured it would be cool for everybody to get some depth and some background. And I shouldn't sound like I'm taking too much credit. It was Alex's idea to go into our backgrounds like this, and so I thought it was a great idea. So
Well, give credit
here
where
we are.
credit is due. So appreciate it.
I will. Yes, I will always try to do that. And feel free to steal credit from me at any time. Because
Absolutely.
I was telling a buddy the other day, being a business owner, he said, good work. And I said, well, look, you're the one who gets the blame when things go wrong. So you're also the one who gets the credit. And he said, well, you can have all the credit then too. So
Yep.
you can have the blame and the credit. I don't want it. Um, anyway. So cool. So did you want me to go first? Did you want to go first? How do you
Yeah.
want to
Why don't you take it off? I'm kind of interested to hear the story of Schramm.
The story of Strand. That sounds so much more epic than I promise it will be.
Well,
But hey, at least you're giving me a chance. Um, so I was thinking about the best way to really start off with this, and ironically, I think it's a almost a full circle theme because I've been reflecting lately based on a book I read. So I've never been much. Now I realize we're on the Story World podcast, and funny enough. I've never been much for reading like biographies and even autobiographies about people. Um, and I don't know, I've just never really done that. And I just got done finishing a book that it's not an autobiography, but in a sense, it is. I mean, it's at least an autobiography about this guy's professional life. And what it is, the book is called The Ride of a Lifetime. And it's by Bob Iger, and he was the CEO of Disney World for the past 15 years or so. And part of their story is he actually started with ABC like 45 or so years ago. Because I think he retired in like 2021 or late 2020 or early 2021, one of those. Um, and so at that point, it had been like 45 years that he had worked for ABC. And then, of course, Disney bought ABC in, I think it was the early 90s or maybe the late 80s one. I don't know. Regardless, he had been with them for quite some time, started out very low on the totem pole, and then moved up the ranks. And it was really interesting because what I learned is that I just didn't know how influential because when they were bought, when they were acquired, he was like, Bob Iger was like a really high up at ABC. And when the Disney acquisition happened, he was basically the third head, right? I mean, the third in command of the entire company. And then he moved into the COO position pretty quick. And then eventually in 2005, was it 2005? I think it was 2005. Maybe it was 2000. Maybe it was around 2000. He was given the CEO position and then held that, of course, through his retirement. And what I realized was that those super formative years of my life. So we used to go to Disney. My mom would take me to Disney almost every year. Huge part of my childhood. Of course, I was born in '89. So I grew up with all, I mean, come on, The Lion King, you know what I'm saying? Like all that kind of stuff. Growing up was my bread and butter. I loved, The Little Mermaid, just all the things, right? All the good stories. And I you gotta love a good Disney princess, even if you are a dude. So um,
absolutely. Are you a man if you don't?
no, I don't think you are. So that solves that. Um, right. But it was really interesting because I honestly, uh, we'll talk about this in the next episode, but I have, a bit of a Disney fetish, I guess you could say. I just love Disney. And so I bought the book thinking, oh, cool. Like I love Disney as a company. So I'm going to get to like learn a lot of their principles and stuff. And while that was cool, I honestly didn't expect the book to be as story driven as it was. And what I was kind of finding out was all these mind blown moments because I was reading the story of this guy who was basically responsible for coming up with like even some of the original ideas, or at least being extremely involved with many of the shows and movies and everything that I grew up with. I mean, we talked about some of the Disney stuff, but even like the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, right? The game show from like 2000, 2001,
Yeah.
like that came, right? Like that was under his direction that came to be. And I like, right. So it's like, man, my childhood, it feels like, was almost formed by this guy, and here I'm reading his stories. And so what does that have to do with me? Well, I mean, it has a lot to do with me because I realized throughout that when he was talking about just all of the movies and shows and everything, there's even a name for it at this time of for that era of Disney where Michael Eisner was the CEO. And then Frank Wells for the first little bit was the COO. And then eventually Bob Iger moved in about midway through the 90s as the COO. Um, Throughout that time period is known as, I think they call it like the golden age of Disney or something like that, where there were all of these great, these things that people your age and my age cling on to, these great movies, TV shows and everything. They all happened like during that era. And so it's like, right, like it's named. And so what I realized is that I literally grew up during the prime of Disney storytelling, which, like, if you think about that, that's really just insane. Not to mention if you factor in that Pixar came along with
Yeah.
Toy Story
Yeah.
at 1993, and then there was a partnership with Disney and Pixar, and then that fell apart, and then what happened later is Disney actually bought Pixar and it became Disney Pixar. And so, I mean, I remember all of that, but like there was this golden age of storytelling that was going on. And I think that made a huge impact in my life, honestly, as it relates to the idea of story. And I never really put all the pieces together until literally, I mean, I just finished the book earlier this week. And I know it took me a couple days to read it because, I was listening to it and whatever, but like it was just really eye opening for me how big of an impact that made. And then, of course, it'd be hard to deny growing up in church, with Bible stories and, a Sunday school lesson every day, or every Sunday, of course. And then, growing up in a Christian school like I went to, we had a, 30 to 45-minute Bible class every morning that opens it up. And I mean, that may sound like, oh, well, big whoop, but they don't really get that in public school. Like there's not really that. I mean, there might be a time, later, I'm sure during your formative years, it's like a storybook time or something like that. But I mean, you don't get like a full like 45-minute lesson devoted to, like these timeless biblical stories every day like you do in a Christian school. And so I think that was a really big part of of introduction to story for me, as I was growing up. And so it's always been, in the background of my life, both fiction and nonfiction stories. Do you remember, Alex, those old book fairs? I don't know if you growing up, if you ever had any of those book fairs
Yeah.
at schools that you went to.
I think they might be still around too, a whole bunch of them.
Maybe.
Yeah, yeah, no, I remember seeing them. I don't think my school actually did them. I remember going to other people's schools, like, for a basketball game or something, thinking, what's all this here?"
Yeah. Pardon me. Yeah. Yeah, we totally had, right. Yeah, we had a lot of those. We had these book fairs and things. And so I remember story being a big part of my childhood. And then um video games, I mean, you name it, right? This is my entire life is just a testament to the fact that actually every time you turn the corner, boom, like there's a story.
Yep.
Some of the stories, like video games I played, like Conker's Bad Fur Day, any OGs that remember that, no, that was not a good storyline. But there it was. It was a very much rated R storyline. I should have never played it at the age that I did, but I did, right? And so, right, even down to all the video games and everything, like you're literally just being infected by story everywhere that you turn. That was no different, with me. And then last time that we talked, we went down a little bit of the road of the music career that I had. So I'm not gonna like rehash all of that, but I was a professional musician for for sure about 6 years. You could argue a couple years longer than that if you count the studio work that I did before I was a touring musician. But especially that time, well, number one, music in itself is just storytelling. So just being around that and getting the chance to write some songs as well, uh, there's that aspect to it. But also being on the road and hearing, the guys that I got to travel with, like I was saying in the previous episodes, like um, it was like story time all the time. They had been by the time I joined up with them, they had been on the road for around 60 years. And you can imagine the stories of 60 years of traveling around the country, playing at different churches and stuff. And so their ministry was a very story driven ministry. I even made the point that at their funerals, part of part of the interesting thing about their funerals was that their stories were being, retold. And it was like it kept dawning on me as it was happening. Like, what an impact that these people had had, and it was through story. Like it's not like we just played the next song, said a few words, then played the next song. It's like every song had a story attached to it, and then now these not just the songs, but the stories are living beyond them as the writers. They
Yep.
wrote over 400 songs. Each one has a story. And so, you see, so the world is just being infected more and more by story. And and so as a musician working in the studio, a lot of what we did was some creative work for bands that would come in. And so we did website work for them. And I wasn't at the time much of a website designer or anything like that. I wasn't into, back then you didn't have tools like you have today to make it a little bit easier. You had to be into actually coding and graphic design. You actually had to have really big skill sets in those things in order to be successful at it back in the day. And my buddy was doing it, and I was very much like, yeah, I don't want any part of that. How about I just handle the words?
There we
I'm
go.
good with grammar. My mom's been a secretary for 15, 20 years. I'm pretty good with words. And so I decided, here we go again, to do the writing. And a lot of that, again, because these were bands, a lot of it was their stories. They would write out like a bullet point of their bio for each of the band members and also the history of the band or whatever. And my job would be to go in there and actually make it a compelling biography of the band and also compelling biographies of the band members. And so that's sort of where my love and passion for writing really started to surface. I didn't know how much I was into writing and how much I would enjoy it until I started doing that. And once I got to that point, it really made a big difference. So I guess, to keep it going, fast forward a few years, and it was about 2015. I had started working during the week at a law firm, and I was the runner, I was their courier, so I would basically run errands and pick up documents, deliver documents, and whatever. And and I started in 2015, and then or late 2014, I think it was, or maybe it was no, it was early 2014. It was February 2014, and then by 2015, they moved me. They realized I had both a passion and a proficiency for technology, and so they moved me into IT, and they asked me to learn how to do SEO. Now, I never had anything to do with this in the past. I didn't even know what it was. And so I did my research and I found out that SEO stood for search engine optimization. and they really wanted to learn how to get into that. And so I started learning about search engine optimization. And that was really my first foray into marketing. Um, I had always had a passion for sales and for business because my mentor was kind of like my dad, one of the Easter brothers that I played with. It was his son, Russell Jr. It was like a dad to me. And his son is Jared, my best friend. And it's just interesting. So Russell Jr. was a really good businessman, a really good salesman, and just really gave me that passion for business itself, but the marketing angle of it. Oh, well, plus there was Shark Tank. There's ABC again, right? I mean, when they introduced Shark Tank, it was like, okay, this is cool. This is pretty cool stuff. I like what they're doing here. Um, and that's part of what made entrepreneurship cool. Again, and entrepreneurship is cool now. It used to not be.
Is
And
that the
I think
format that you conduct your interviews with? Is Shark Tank format? You sit at
no,
the top of a stage and look down on people.
I should. I should start doing that. We'll see how that goes next time. Uh, as of right now, no, that is not how it
Okay.
works. And and so I really did love business, but I hadn't really gotten into marketing at that point. And so when I started researching SEO, I stumbled across people like Neil Patel, who's a huge marketing influence and copy blogger, people like that, and then it was a trickle effect. I got into the online business space. This all happened so quickly. Names like Michael Hyatt and then Amy Porterfield, and it quickly got into people like Russell Brunson and just other online influencers. And what I what I learned after I got so into SEO and marketing and email marketing and just the online business world, what I found was that they all what they all latched onto was storytelling. This was the name of the game. It was all storytelling. It almost didn't matter what you had for sale. It almost didn't matter how expensive it was. None of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was, could you tell a compelling enough story that would get people to buy? And if you look at Donald Miller is another great marketing authority. He's got a couple great books out like Story Brand, um, and Business Made Simple, Marketing Made Simple. And he really goes into the idea of story as a device for marketing and all the great copywriters of days gone by, Gary Halpert, Dan Kennedy, Joe Sugarman, people like this, Frank Kern. You guys are all, they just latch on to story. It's just all about stories to be compelling as a marketer. And I just, I just didn't realize how important, like I wasn't aware of how important that story was to humans in terms of making us take action, being persuasive and things like that. Um, and I am now, and I'm thankful for it. And like I said, for a while after getting into that, um, my wholesale interaction, because I don't do as much music anymore. I do play music at church, and me and a buddy of mine are working on a music related business, but I don't do much music anymore outside of those things. Um, Video games, I'm trying to get back into video games now, but I'm for a while I
I'm
wasn't
waiting.
really doing. Yeah, I know, right? I wasn't really doing that. And so like many of these other avenues of story I've gotten out of, with the exception of biblical stuff. I've always, I actually got more into Bible stuff. And so I'm even more intrigued about those stories. But yeah, I mean, thanks in part actually to Alex, I'm sort of revisiting the world of fiction now. And I think I'd even like to write a novel one day. I think that's interesting. And I'm just really, because I think marketing is so interesting, or storytelling is so interesting from the marketing point of view, I really want to learn the concept of story itself even better, so that it's something that I can use and apply in my marketing, but also just in my life. Um, I think I mentioned this in one of the previous episodes, but like the idea as I want to express it is just, if you can learn storytelling, you can be successful. That's the bottom line. If you learn storytelling and you want it to go the fiction route, you can become a screenwriter. You can write novels. You can write this would kind of blend a little bit, but you could theoretically write songs. You know what I mean? Like there's so many things you could do. Well, what if you wanted to go the nonfiction route? Well, you could become a nonfiction author on another subject that you're passionate about if you learn writing. If you're selling anything, it literally does not matter. I don't care what you're selling. I have seen stories used, I'm not kidding, to sell toilet paper before. To sell RV flushable, like dissolvable toilet paper. Okay. Like the possibilities are endless. If you just learn to get good at storytelling, right? And again, you wanted to go that nonfiction route, you could, no matter what you're selling, product, service, tools, whatever, if you get good at story, you can do sales and marketing. And so there is no disadvantage to becoming a better storyteller. Even if maybe you don't want to sell something or whatever, maybe you just want to get a good job. Telling you, the better story you can write to make your LinkedIn profile more appealing, to make your resume more appealing, just whatever. People get sucked into stories. They work on all humans. And so
just to insert something there about job interviews, one of the most common questions, and it usually is several times, will say, tell me a situation or tell me a story when you did this or when this happened. And I mean, in an interview, half of it, at least a good interviewer will ask you and just let you talk about a situation that happened. Just learning how to tell a story, and whether it's something simple.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Anyway, you brought up interviews, and that just kind of came to
No, that's a really good point. It's been a long time since I interviewed for a job, because the last real job I had was the law firm job, and that's actually a story in itself. I sort of fell into that job, didn't even have an interview really, and then before that, I guess would have been when I went to Best Buy. So I probably interviewed for Best Buy in like summer of 2008, something like that. And that was probably the last time I was in a job interview. But I do seem to remember them asking me to tell them a story about customer interactions that I had before, in different settings and things like that. So yeah, you're totally right. So really that's sort of the end of my story, in the sense of that's where we are right now as it relates to my journey of understanding story from the fiction world, and then moving more into the nonfiction world. And then now that my business is doing a lot better, and I'm actually applying story quite well in my own life from the marketing perspective, now my time is freeing up at least a little bit on some things. And so now I'm trying to swing back a little bit more into fiction and video games and things. So I'm really interested to see where sort of the future, what the future holds for me, on that side of things.
That's interesting that you're kind of trying to get to a little bit more of the fiction side, because I've kind of gone the opposite route. Is I've kind of decided to just go all in on the fiction side of things. Now, that also is because I want to write fiction and do it well, and so I guess that maximizes my learning and understanding, and so I guess there's an aspect to it there. But so I remember the first movie I saw growing up in theater was Toy Story. And of course, yeah, not putting these other movies down, but like Lion King was great and all that, but it was also the older format of cartoons. And so I guess that came out in 95 or 96, so I was 3 or 4 years old. And
It was 93, I believe. Toy Story, I think
was
it was
it?
93.
Maybe it was an
It was
old,
either
like,
93 or 95.
I was born in 92. It could have been an old dollar theater that my mom took me to, and they were rerunning it. That's probably what happened. But I remember sitting there and just being totally blown away by it. So similar situations with seeing those older cartoons. I'd have to say though, my favorite Disney movie is probably for the cartoon side of things is Beauty and the Beast. It's just what a great
That's
movie.
a
I actually
fantastic
watched that
story.
with Brooke and Evie the other day, and oh, it's just such a good story. It's just good all around.
Tale as old as time. Yes.
Tale is all the time. Yeah, it's got I think one of the reasons too why I gravitated towards is it has a very, I guess they all do, but for some reason something about that one has a real like fantastic fantasy, feel about it. I don't know, but yeah, that's a good one. Well, good. That's a good story on
Yeah, for
Steve
sure.
and a little bit about you.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's interesting. I've had to do a lot more like self-reflection throughout this process than I realized I even would, and it's been helpful. It's been really interesting to see how all the threads tie together. So I'm interested to hear Alex's
Yeah,
story.
yeah. So
You know?
I'll probably go all over the place here. It's funny. So, the first thing that I always think of how I got into really enjoying stories, aside from when I was like 2, 3 year old watching cartoons and everything, is usually The Hobbit, and Lord of the Rings. But then I remembered that no, I think the first thing that I really fell in love with, it's funny because I'm not a diehard fan today, but as a kid was awesome, was Star Wars. Um, because when were those movies released? Late 70s, early 80s, I think.
Yeah,
That's when it cleared.
yeah, this was I'm glad you brought this up because it was gonna get honorable mention in my stories, and
Right.
I didn't know where to work it in, so I'm glad you brought Star Wars.
It's funny because I actually I don't think that it's had a significant effect really on my thoughts on what I write and what I enjoy, but I just remember as a kid getting the Star Wars toys and watching them over and over and over, and it was just a really cool story to watch. But anyway, yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind. But um I one of the I think probably the earliest memory that I have of really something captivating my attention and putting me into that fantasy world and just taking me away was The Hobbit, but more specifically, I must have been 7 years old, maybe eight, so 7, 8 years old. I don't know what version of it was, but my stepfather bought The Hobbit on cassette tape, and it was a dramatization of it. Maybe it was the one that you were listening to Lord of the Rings one, but maybe it was a similar setup to the Hobbit one. And I remember, yeah, we'd listen to, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes of it before bedtime every night, and just laying in bed and listening to it and just being blown away with the character voices and what was happening. And it just it really just wowed me. And then of course, because I liked it so much, my stepfather would tell me stories from the Silmarillion. That was definitely too dense of a book for me to read at 7 years old, but he told me some cool stories from it, and just made me love it even more. um it's funny, I wonder if I would have been born at any other time, if this next part would have been any had a different effect on my life. But I was 9 years old when the first Lord of the Rings movie came out in theaters, so after being introduced to The Hobbit, I'm sure probably he saw that The Lord of the Rings was being made, and he thought, "Wow, I gotta, get my kids into The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings to get ready for that." And so 9 years old, it you know, a kid's imagination just runs wild, and they tend to believe everything and just get right into it. And I just remember sitting in the theater, and even though it was an 3.5 hour long movie, I just remember never wanting it to end. Just sitting there, and from the very beginning, and even though it's a very interesting start and there's some up and downs, it's a very long start to that movie. But I loved every bit of it. Um, and and when the ending came, I don't know. I don't really know how to describe the feeling that it gave me, but I just knew that that was something that I just loved, and it blew me away. I will say that night I actually was kind of afraid to go to bed because the Urukai kind of scared me a little bit because I was only 9. So even though I loved it, I was like, "Oh, gee, those things were kind of scary."
Yeah, there were some pretty scary, interesting people in those films. So
I know that you haven't watched the movies yet, but get ready for the mouth of Sauron and the final movie. It's quite nasty,
I
but
can't wait.
yeah, I
I'm so
know.
excited.
So anyway, so that really, I don't know, it's obviously a big thing to say that that changed the future of my life. I don't know what type of impression that had on me. I just know that from that moment forward, the number of times I've spent watching, especially the first Lord of the Rings, and then playing the video games that came out, and just learning all about it. I just can't put together all the hours that I've spent, in Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings, and so that definitely has had a profound effect on my interest in fiction and fantasy setting, and everything like that. Um, so yeah, so those movies came out between 9 and 11, and then throughout that time too, very different um, side of fiction, but that's when the Harry Potter books were also big. I forget exactly what year they came out, but when I was that age, they obviously were very popular. Um, and so again, Lord of the Rings was still kind of that number one influence in my life that really, um, yeah, really made me want to write fiction and be a part of the fantasy and get excited about it. But Harry Potter was also exciting too. I think a big part of that is because I grew up like with Harry. I think the last book when he was 17 years old came out when I was 17 years old. And I first started reading it when I was around 8, 9, or 10. So I literally kind of grew up with Harry. So the books were naturally kind of adjusted to my age, and it felt like a natural flow in life of, following along with what Harry was doing. And so um those definitely um I don't know to what extent they had a huge influence on my life, but they were some of the most enjoyable books that I wrote, and it was just always excited to read them. Um, when I was again around the time with Lord of the Rings, my dad, my birth dad, he doesn't care for Lord of the Rings too much, but one book series that he had always told me about was the Chronicles of Thomas Coven. Have you ever heard of them?
No, the Chronicles of Thomas who?
Covenant.
Covenant. Nothing. Huh? Yeah.
Um, Thomas Covenant, it was originally a 3-book series. Then he made a second series of 3 books, and then a third series of 4 books. So a total of 10 books in the series. The first ones came out in the early 70s or mid 70s, and my dad read them when they first came out and just fell in love with them. So when I was about 8 or 9, right around Lord of the Rings time, he started telling me stories from the books. He did not let me read them yet. They were just they're a heavy read. As a kid, I was told, a lot of big words, and that was an understatement.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the criticisms of the author is that he goes too far into his descriptions and everything. But when I was about 10, 10 or 11, I decided to read them. I probably still was a little bit too young to really understand everything. Um, but that right next to Lord of the Rings is probably the most influential books that I read. And I think the reason being is because of how real the story felt. Um, just touching on it a little bit, the main character actually lives in our normal world, and he's a leper. Um, the author actually grew up. His parents were missionaries. I might be off a little bit, but they lived over in, I want to say India. I'm probably wrong, but another country, and where leprosy was still around at that time. And so he understood leprosy a lot, and so his main character was a leper, and went into great detail about his life and the stuff he had to go through. And then he gets hit by a car, gets in a coma, and then gets transported to what they call the land in this fantasy world. And it's just it's one of those books where either you love it, you hate it, and I love it. And one of the most profound things I think that my dad said to me quite often as a kid in relation to these books was he would always ask me, he'd say, Alex, think how amazing that would be if that were real and we could go there and we could visit that and see the people there and the creatures and experience the magic that's there and just be able to live that. And it kind of had both um, a kind of a exciting but also sad effect, because it is a little sad. Yet these fictional places you can't go and visit. I'll never be able to go and visit the places in Middle Earth. I'll never be able to go and visit any of these places that are created in fiction. Yet the stories are so good, and especially how well written they are, that it does transport your mind to those, and you want them to be real because they do feel real to you. And so that was kind of a go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say it's Disney strikes me as an interesting example of a sort of a blending, right? Of that, it's like the kind of the point of like Disney World is that the lands that they create, you can go there,
That's true.
for
Yeah. Yeah.
and so that's
Yeah.
I remember growing up, not to you know
No, you're
come
good.
into your story here, but there was actually a place. So I am from South Jersey, and there is a place down there called Storybook Land, and all of these old, like nursery rhyme storybooks, or like they they made this stuff in a sense come to life in this little park. It's like, there's what's a good example? There's from the cradle, and the bell breaks, the cradle will fall. There
Yeah.
maybe, cradle maybe, there's the cradle like swinging from the treetops.
Yeah.
There's the old woman who lives in a shoe, like you can go in her shoe house.
I wonder
Stuff like
if they had multiple parks, because there was one, I think it was called Storyland in New Hampshire, and it was the exact same thing. I remember the lady in the shoe, they had a big shoe, and it was all about storybooks. So I wonder if it's the same
interesting.
company or not.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
don't
I
know.
had the
I
same
always
thing.
did. I always did think that was super cool. So
Yeah, no, it is neat. Yeah, well, I remember too when I was in high school, playing Lord of the Rings online, and so you make your character and you run around through Middle Earth, and boy, that was fun. Just getting as close to being in that world as you can. I definitely see, kind of getting a little off topic, but I definitely see down the road where people wanting to get into virtual reality, and if there was a fully fictional creative world that everyone loved, not wanting to leave. Anyway, that's probably
yeah,
another topic for another time. That'd be interesting. Um,
yeah. I was gonna show you this real quick. I can,
yeah,
because I think this StreamYard setup here is pretty cool. I think I could just like really easily share like a browser tab with you, and like with everybody.
yeah,
And
I can
so
see it.
yeah, so you can see it there. So yeah, so this is Storybook Land. It's in so from 19 since 1955, and yeah, it's like this cool, obviously if you're listening on audio you're not going to be able to see this, but join us on YouTube and you will be able to check this out. I do not have a YouTube channel up as I am speaking these words, but it will
But
be
we
up
will.
sooner rather than later. And yeah, so yeah, there it is, Black Horse Pike, Egg Harbor Township. This is, close to where my aunt and uncle were from, and so Headland Advertising. Again, I don't know the company or whatever, but yeah, it looks like they're still going. They're still doing their thing there,
Nice.
and just introducing yeah, like rides. There's the yeah, Out on a Limb, Bubbles on the Coaster. Boy, it's sure, yeah, it's even changed a lot. But yeah, there's Jack and the Beanstalk and the Happy Dragon, old timers. I remember those. The Whirly Bug, yeah, J&J Railroad. So anyway, cool, cool stuff. I love when people see this is a blending, right, of some entrepreneur somewhere in 1955 decided to blend the two worlds of story and the real life, and then making people think in terms of story. And anyway, so just a super cool thing. I love seeing innovative ideas like that come
Oh
to life.
yeah, absolutely. No, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll continue right off. So yeah, the Thomas Coven books, I've since read them. I read them quite a few times, and every time, just getting older and understanding life more and everything, I always get something new from it. But both that and Lord of the Rings in just two totally different ways have really shaped, kind of my line of fiction and fantasy, and my enjoyment from them. Um, I'll make a small note here. Um, I I love video games. I probably at certain points in my life played them too much more than what I probably should have. But as a kid, I played them a lot. But when I was about 11 or 12, a lot of stuff happened between the ages of 8 and 12 to me. I now looking back on it, but when I was around 12 years old, I rented a game um, from a movie rental store. Don't have those anymore. And
Wow, you're
yeah, I
dating
know.
yourself
Shit,
pretty
yeah.
good here, Alex. Wow,
Yeah, well, am I old enough to date myself now? Well, I guess. Oof, I
you
guess I'm
are.
getting there.
Isn't that
Um,
sad?
it is. Um, and the game was Final Fantasy X. You ever heard of the Final Fantasy games?
Oh yeah.
Um, I and so it's not the best game ever made, but it is my favorite game that I've ever played. I think is because I played it at that time where fantasy was becoming, I guess real to me. And it just it just blew me away. just the magic of it and um, the fantasticness of it. And of course, the video games are fun to play anyway. A game has to be, fun in order for it to be enjoyable. But the cast of characters and the story, and it kind of took me to another world, just with Lord of the Rings and Thomas Coven. Um, so those were some kind of influential things in my life that really, when I was younger. Um, those are kind of some big things for me that kind of influence my interests in life as books that I read throughout high school and college and me wanting to write, which I'll talk actually a little bit right now. So I started to write simple stories when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, and they were all basically repeat stories of what my dad told me about Thomas Covenant and the land, or what I heard about Lord of the Rings. And so, which is natural, kids write what they hear, and it was awful. I know it wasn't, but my dad would always, really say, "Oh, that's really great, good job." So even if your kids aren't good at something, when they're that young, tell them how great it is because they might just keep going with it. Um, I wrote just several small stuff like that growing up. Nothing, big. I was just so young. But then when I got into about junior high level, I really started to want to, just develop more and write more. And so I really spent a lot of time dedicated to building my own world. And we'll talk another time about digging into writing process and everything. But so I spent a lot of time building this world and a story I wanted to tell with it. And um the world has continued to grow, and I actually still very much write it and want to write books in it. But the first few books I wrote obviously just were not very good. I was young and just learning to write. But I kept getting better and better at it. I actually, sad to say, I've actually never finished writing a book. I have always written a good chunk of a book and just stop, which is a horrible thing to do. And I didn't realize that at the time, but I do now. So if you're going to write a book, unless you know it's utter garbage and you really want to go a different direction, just don't finish it. I mean, finish it. It's good to finish a book and say that you did it. But anyway, one thing that I kind of wasted, I guess, was, and I think it was just because I have an interest in a variety of things. Was in college, I really slacked off on my writing a lot. Instead of going the route that some people do, like for instance, Brandon Sanderson decided he did not want a normal job at all, so he went to college for writing. He worked the graveyard shift at a hotel, and he wrote and wrote and wrote until he got a deal, and then that's what he does now. I took the opposite approach where I didn't know how if writing could sustain a family, and I really wanted a family and I wanted that security, and so I went the route of getting a career in finance and accounting, which I don't regret, but doing that so took away a lot of time from like creative writing. Like I could have taken creative writing classes that I didn't. And then I also played some sports in college. Just like interleague at the college. Hung out with friends a lot. Played video games. Read a lot. I did some writing, but I dropped the ball more than what I should have. Um, I did read a lot, and that was during the time where I started to really get more into epic fantasy, where I read Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. I actually read halfway through it, and then college got so busy I put it down. Um, but so I actually have to go back. I have never finished it, and that's going to be a long read when I finally do pick it up again. I don't know if you're familiar with those books, but they're 14 books long, and I guess the average page count is, I don't know, somewhere around 800 pages a book. Um,
Are you
Something like
serious?
that.
Oh
Yeah.
my word. I didn't realize that. I do know that there's a new, which this is always a cautious thing, right? But I do know there's a new Amazon series coming out on Prime um, for that. And so I wasn't sure whether or not that was going to be any good or what.
Well, I'll give my opinion on the first episode because that's all I watched. Um, I actually think that um, it wasn't that good. If you read the books a lot, or if you read the books at all, it strayed away from the books considerably. And um, yeah, so I didn't care for. I watched the first episode. I guess maybe I should read more, but they just changed a lot, and I did not really enjoy it. So I hope the Lord of the Rings one are a little bit better. Um,
Gotcha. Yeah, I know some people are like really opinionated about, and I'm not saying you're this kind of person, maybe you are, but some people are like especially readers. Readers are really like opinionated about like film adaptations. And maybe you're not this way though, just across the board. Because I remember you and me talking about the Lord of the Rings, and you recognizing that yeah, there's some things maybe missing, or the order of things maybe changed a little bit in the movies from the books. But all in all, you like the books and the movies for what they are. Um,
we'll,
based
we'll
on
probably we'll probably have to probably take a podcast, an episode sometime and actually dig into adaptations of books and everything.
adaptations.
Because
I'm gonna write it on the list right now.
right now, just if we're okay taking just a couple minute tangent or a minute tangent, like for instance, one of the changes in the Dune movie, in the book, the Doctor is or not the Doctor. I've only read the book once, and so I'm still sometimes I forget some of the characters. Not the Doctor. The person in I think in charge of transitioning them to the planet was a man, and then in the movie was a female, and I think it worked well because the character was true to form. I think that's kind of the biggest thing is are the characters realistic and do they stay true to what we expect or what we know the characters should be? And if they behave the way that they should be, then we're okay with pretty much any changes. Not any, but I guess most of the changes that a movie makes. Um, but yeah, the Wheel of Time ones just made some. I'll talk about it with you some other time, or we can have a podcast on it sometime. But just made some changes I was not very fond of at all. Just getting
Cool.
kind of
Yeah.
to the end here. So since college and then up to now, I guess has been 7 years for me, 6, 7 years. And during that time, um, well, 7, 8 years ago, I got married. A couple years ago, I had a kid, and it was about 4 or 5 years ago I decided to pick up really writing again, um, quite a bit. And I I ran into a situation where honestly it came down to I didn't know how to write well. Um, I I just didn't know how to write. And I didn't know what it was at the time. I thought it was just burnout and that I didn't. I knew that you had to develop skill as well, but I just didn't think that I had it. I would feel burnt out after a half hour of writing, couldn't think straight while I was doing it, um, and so what I did instead was I decided to take some time to look into maybe game development because games can tell very good stories. They're fun to play. The music can really add a lot to it. Just a lot of good stuff in video games. Um, so I've learned to do a lot of programming, a lot of art. I've learned quite a bit of stuff over the last couple of years looking at that. Um, and then I came to, I guess, a crossroads within like a few months ago, so real recently, where I really still wanted to write, and it felt like I was missing because it's something I've always wanted to do, and it felt kind of wrong not to do that. Um, and so I just didn't have the time for both, and I had to decide what I wanted to do. And so I decided to put away to the side video game creating and really pick up the writing full steam. And one thing that has really helped, real specifically, is listening to Brandon Sanderson. Not just the podcast that he has, Writing Excuses, which is fantastic, but also now he has his lectures on YouTube for college, and uh, just such a huge wealth of information there. Plus, I do read a lot of fantasy, and really just trying to pay attention to how he writes and other authors write, and so I now my writing has gotten a lot better, and I think it's because I've just paid more attention and studied and really tried to learn as best I can the proper way of writing. It's not to say that I can't also every author will have their own style of writing and should be distinct from others with their tone, their prose and how they tell a story, but there's just certain not rules, but just certain ways and methods that to tell a good story. And I just didn't know that before. And I didn't know how to outline properly. And now that I have all that not perfected, but now that I understand kind of the journey to take with that, it's been it's been going very well. So yeah, I think that's kind of a think that's kind of an overview, and I've hit everything that's gotten me here. I do want to make just a couple notes that really help a lot. Is My wife is a very big critic of my writing that I send her. She doesn't seem to be impressed with anything I write, which is very helpful. One, she doesn't like Lord of the Rings too much and the fiction writing. So whatever I write, she probably naturally won't like, but she does it
Right.
because she wants to help me and make me a better person, a better writer. And so it's very helpful to have her on hand because instead of her getting deep into the story and understanding, everything with that, she more or less says, "Well, that doesn't make sense. Why would that person say that? Or why would you word it that way?" So she's very helpful with that. And then also my daughter, Evelette, of course, whatever she wants to do in life, I'm happy with, but I gotta at least try to get her into some of the interests I want. So I want to be able to create stories for her and for her to have a world to enjoy and, you know, just be able to enjoy that together.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I totally sympathize with actually both of those things. Because my wife tends to be one of the biggest critics of my work, and in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also for my kids, I see what you're talking about doing with stories is what I like. One of the reasons I like to write blogs and I like to record podcasts and whatever is because like I'm thinking. So I lost my dad in 2001. He passed away from complications. He had leukemia, but he passed away because he caught pneumonia while he was in the hospital. You know, your immune system is real weak when you're being treated for stuff like that. And he and my mom had separated, but we didn't have a super close relationship. So, I mean, it wasn't like losing the guy who lives with you every day and you're doing life together. It wasn't like that, but it was still obviously dad. Um, and I, a few years after he died, probably 7 or 8 years after he died, maybe a little less than that. I was looking through like an old box of stuff that my stepmom had given me, and there were these journal entries that he wrote on a old fashioned. So he was a computer guy. He was a tech nerd. You know, again, this is turn of the century. So I mean, he was working for like Arthur Anderson and like these big companies that anyway, he was doing programming and stuff. And so he was like, he was one of the first people to be writing on what you might call a web blog, right? So he was writing on a blog back in the day, and it just is one of those kind of journal sites that was up at this time. I mean, there wasn't much more you could do with the internet, back then. Well, I mean, there was, but regardless, consumers weren't using the internet back then like they are, today. And but I had printouts of those journal entries, and I was able to read them. There wasn't that many of them, but I'm sort of putting my kids in that position and just thinking like if I could go back right now and watch or listen to my dad on a podcast, sharing his insights about whatever, that would be priceless for me. As I can't help but think that the same thing would likely be true of my kids. And so, in a sense, what I want to do with my storytelling through the marketing and through the nonfiction, thought leadership type of things that I do, I I want to, I guess, leave that legacy, right? I want to build a body of work that one day when I'm dead and gone, my kids can look back on and read or watch or listen to. I mean, I write books and I want to continue writing nonfiction books and even getting into fiction books for this reason as well, because your ideas can outlive you. And we're both Christians, and so obviously I realize there's life after death. There are, this world is not the only thing that is, and there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. And again, this isn't an eschatology lesson, but the idea being that like what we do on this earth matters. It matters now, and I think to an extent it even matters for going into the future. And so I love the idea of building a body of work, something that can live beyond just the physical time on this earth that you're given. And I think whether you're religious or not, that's a great motivation for writing whether it be fiction or nonfiction, and telling stories and interacting that way.
Absolutely.
So
I think that we were talking the other day about, you kind of touched on it, but if we're not the first generation for it, we're certainly one of the first. Where our grandkids, a thousand years in the future, can look back and watch videos of us that they want, learn all about us. And so the
yeah,
first thing about putting our life out here, it's unique. Like I don't know anything about my great grandfather. I know some things about him, but if you go past any further than
right.
that, I don't know anything about, them. And so
Isn't that wild?
it's crazy to think that, yeah, my great great grandchildren, however far down, can look back and know all they want to about me. Of whatever information I put out there, they can learn and know. I wanted to add one more thing that you had mentioned about that you would be on the wild and crazy tour bus with the Easter Brothers and be sharing stories. Well, um, I would say even though I talked a lot about the fiction side of things, but some of my favorite things was between, well, I guess as a teenager, mostly going camping with my uncles and my cousins and my dad, and just hearing all the stories of um, my dad growing up and my older brothers, and they just, it's funny. My life hasn't been that interesting, but theirs certainly has been, and just so many amazing stories. And what's funny is I can recite pretty much all of them, but whenever we go on a camping trip or I'm talking to my dad and I remember a particular story he told that I like, I'll ask him to tell it again, like I forgot about it. Just to hear him tell it again. Um, and that's
Yeah.
I don't know, it's a funny thing, just listening to people tell stories. It's something that, at least for me, that I really enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the wild and crazy. See, when you're at Easter, you deal buses, you get but one of the Easter Brothers' sons was a bus dealer in Bassett, Virginia, Stewart, Virginia area, and um, one time they bought a party bus, no joke, from him, and it like seriously had like the pole in the back and the whole 9 yards, and it was like we used it to take like the family on day trips and stuff like that. We didn't really use it for overnight trips to gigs, but yeah, we would use it for day trips and stuff.
You
And it was the
didn't you
party
didn't
bus.
think that that was your new instrument for you to play in the band?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
witnessed
yeah. I
it.
love it. No, no, yeah, I totally dig that, right? Because like my my wife, she's a pastor's kid, and so they pastor in like whatever, I don't even know what it is, 5 or 6 different states, and it's so funny. Anytime you're there and you're hanging out with them, inevitably somebody will start telling a story. And what's really interesting is they all sort of remember little different things about it. And so like they'll even get into arguments. Like one sees it this way, another sees it that.
Yeah.
And I always point it out. And I used to make fun of it, but that like they'll tell me the same stories a lot of times. And my wife, I'll be like, I'll joke around with her and be like, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, 6. So, and she knows exactly what I'm saying because I've
Yep.
given her such a hard time about it. Like, but it's cool though. Like, it's I mean, what do you have if not but stories? I mean, what are pictures? Pictures. What is the pictures better than 1,000 words? Is that the old saying? Right? Because there's a story associated with a picture. That's why. So,
Well, one thing
uh,
that I know we're at the end here, but one thing I didn't get a chance to get into, just because it doesn't have to do with specifically with my writing, but the influence that music has had on me, my life. I mean, even though I've never learned how to play, um, never learned how to play an instrument, or tried to study some music. I've tried to learn stuff on composing and just listening to a variety of music, and it just seems like music just surrounds my life. Whatever I'm doing, if I'm not doing something specifically, I'm listening to music, and not just listening to it, but just really getting into it, understanding it, and music's. So we'll probably have several podcasts, I would think, related to music. But yeah, that was another big part of just
yeah,
kind
I'm
of my
sure.
life.
Very good. Cool.
Anyway,
All right, man. Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. This has been great, and I think it'll be really really cool for people to get a deeper introduction into our individual stories. And
absolutely.
so yeah, I think next week we're going to be talking about the like our favorite stories. We'll kind of go back and forth a little bit on some of the favorite stories that we have. And so I am super super looking forward to that. So
That'll be fun.
yeah, man. All right, cool. See you then.
Yep. See ya.